On today's episode, I have my friend Josh Berry. We've known each other for a few years. We worked on a couple projects together at his company, Iconic. He's probably one of the nicest people I know and one of the most genuine individuals. And Josh, congratulations! Today is the first big day of your book launch, Dare to Be Naive. So on the cover of the book, I prepped you for this, so hopefully you wrote the book, so I'm hoping you have an answer. But how do you find yourself in a noisy world today?
Uh, Trevor, thanks for having me here. You're right. The subtitle to Dare to Be Naive is How to Find Your True Self in a Noisy World. And I think the best way to do it is to continually question yourself. You have to not take where you're at as like the set state of where you are. And it's only through, honestly, the tension and the friction with the noise that I think you continually find your true self. And so the book itself actually doesn't tell you here's the 12 steps you need to do to find your true self. The book is much more reflective in nature and just uses a lot of stories and anecdotes to like poke at people's heads and their hearts to get them to question, well, what do you actually believe and what do you actually think, so that hopefully they keep kind of peeling back the layers of maybe who they actually are, even if it's a little bit different compared to what might be in the mainstream.
So what's like one of the things from the book? Because it just came out, so I have not read it yet. But what's one of the ways that you do that? I know you said it's not like here's the 12
Yeah,
steps,
yeah, yeah.
but like yeah,
One of the chapters in there is it is related to business, but it isn't necessarily a business book. But a lot of the examples are things that relate back to business. One of them
mhm,
is allowing your employees to have side hustles, and it shows
yeah,
examples and research and stories of people, especially leaders, who've said, you know what, the idea of I'm renting your time for pay is starting to be a little bit more outdated, and so if I'm not going to have that same agreement with you anymore, and people are doing stuff outside of their hours anyways, why wouldn't I at least want to know what they're doing sometimes, or at least not block it? And so, to the point of, it doesn't exactly say like, and here's how you change your HR policies to have it. It presents the stories, it prevents the research, and then at the end of the chapter, like all of the chapters in the second half of the book, it just says, okay, what do you believe? Like, do you think it's wrong? Like, do you think maybe you wouldn't be able to trust people if you knew that they had another job? Is it all right? And so what it does is it just prompts the reader to think through a couple of those ideas, and then it goes through a series of four questions that I believe are essential to helping someone really start to peel back and understand what it is that they believe. And those questions are, okay, let's say you believe, no, it's not, I can't trust people to have another job outside of their full-time job. Okay, great. Where did you learn that? Is it really true? And what do you gain and what do you lose by holding that belief? And so it's a way to almost, in some ways, develop a little bit more mindfulness around what you actually believe, because you're trying to create a little bit more objectivity from that belief that has led to some of your practices and what you might actually believe.
yeah. So I'm guessing you've ran through some of this exercise yourself. Has there been anything where you kind of caught yourself saying like you had a very strong belief about something and then you ran through this exercise and you were like, oh man, maybe I do have a slightly outdated belief, or when you realized where it came from, you were kind of like, oh, maybe I need to check myself on it. Maybe the real question is what's the root of this exercise? Like, how did you come up with it?
I'll answer the first and then I'll answer the second part of that.
Yeah. Okay.
So, there have been a number of beliefs that I've had, and these ones might even sound counter to what other people might believe. So, I had believed in the past that I really didn't need to prioritize taking care of myself or other self care things, because it was way more important to take care of other people, and that's what a servant leader does, and they continually serve, serve, serve. And that sounds like a terrible like humble brag now that now that I hear that out loud. But the point that I want to get to it in that is the first question of where did you learn that? I can point and be like, oh, look, all these management gurus said that. And some of my upbringing, there was definitely things growing up in the Midwest that said like, that's how you lead. And then the next question of, is it true? Is it really true that I need to be a servant leader. Everybody else is before me. In some instances that works. What do I gain from it? Well, that was an easy one. Like, oh, people see me. You even said it at the beginning. Like, people see me as a nice, generous person, etc. But what do I lose through that? And that was an interesting spark, right? Like, okay, so what do you lose? And when I was really honest with myself, I realized that sometimes I lose even having an opinion on where things should go, or a vision, thinking that, oh, collaboration and co-creation and everybody else's needs and wants are more important, and that's the way to do things. And it wasn't until really digging in that I realized that sometimes even some of that selflessness was less effective and less healthy, probably, than maybe seeing it more as a spectrum of selfish to selfless, especially in leadership. So that's the answer to your first question. Answer the second question. Where did the questions come from? I first heard a variation of these 4 questions on a podcast, like all good information should be consumed. And when I chased that down, I learned that the origin of the first, at least to me, of the first version of these 4 questions came from a psychologist and therapist named Byron Katie. And she has applied this information. In fact, even if you Google Byron Katie and the 4 questions, like this, there's a variant of this, which is her model. And so wherever I can, I like to plug that I didn't come up with the first. I just took these, modified them, and hopefully I'm one of the first people applying them here in business to be able to help people maybe peel back some of their things. Just on a side note, because since I know a lot of people listening to this are really interested in lifestyle design and whatnot, Tim Ferriss, a couple of weeks ago in his 5 Bullet Friday, actually referenced Byron Katie's 4 questions and the ladder of inference, which I also use in my talks as like the 1-2 combo to help people get more toward their authentic selves. So definitely didn't create this myself.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I grew up in the Midwest as well. I mean, I'm in Iowa right now, and I'm curious as to, you said that there were things that you learned, that you like, leadership style things that you learned and changed. I'm guessing you changed based on how you phrased it. Can you give an example of something you might have learned growing up, or like from leaders you saw early on in your career, that you then recognized as something you want to do differently? And then what did you do? How do you, because it's hard to make those changes, because you kind of have to look in the mirror and be like, okay, maybe I've been trying to do it like them and I think they're wrong, or I'm
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
something's off and I have to make a change. And if those people that you're working with also grew up in the same environment, they might also have that like in their workplace DNA. How do you work through that?
That's really tricky. There's a couple examples that come to mind. The first is in my first career, uh, working internationally for a human resources consulting company. It was a very strengths based and positive psychology based culture. And I would say the positives to that was a lot of idealism, a lot of optimism, a lot of focusing on the good in people. And I saw some of
Mhm.
those things and wanted to emulate those things. Not saying it's the exact opposite side of that coin, but something that I saw that was also very prevalent was any attempt to address a weakness was seen as like focusing too much on negativity. And therefore, it kind of continued to breed a conflict avoidance. Well, you have that culture. And then you combine it with some of the baggage that I brought in from my childhood, which was things that led to being a super people pleaser and trying to get out of conflict in any way possible, even if it created like lukewarm meh situations, because I was just trying to keep peace. And it just probably accelerated some of my view of like, oh, the way to lead is just to focus on what's great. And oh, we better not get into this conflict. So I was in this kind of, sometimes probably even a vicious cycle of continuing to perpetuate some of that. And so, the last now 10 years since I've been out on my own and then with the company that we've established, some of it has been an unlearning of the value of decent conflict and even the idea of the value of an appreciation of weakness, right? And the strength that comes from that and the vulnerability that can come from that. And then that led to a bunch of other understandings that, trying to pursue a win-win situation all of the time isn't always the best outcome, because some of our biggest problems in the world, there's going to be short-term losers at them. And if I try to pursue that, like, I can't actually help probably the people who need some of the most help out there. And so there was definitely a lot of unlearning that had to happen, and it came from iterations and stubbing my toe. Back to your question of how, hard, harsh feedback from people who loved me and cared for me, and then me being able to be open to receiving that and saying like, okay,
Mm.
great, now how do I do it? And some of that then I think led to some of my extreme interest in this book, which is, what are those beliefs that we have that limit us from the next evolution of growth or consciousness, right, that we have? And how might we create a little bit of space for myself and for others to be able to explore what some of those limiting beliefs might be?
Yeah, that sounds like a really powerful exercise. Like, because it's hard. I mean, I think anybody who does any level of introspection, reflection, they're probably going to stumble upon something about like their own beliefs, their frameworks, how they do things. And they're probably going to find something where maybe they don't like it, or they realize maybe they're emulating somebody maybe from their childhood or earlier in their career where they might not even look up to. I'm kind of speaking for myself a little bit.
Sure.
And you realize you're like doing that, and then it's not, it's kind of sometimes it's a hard pill to swallow because you're like, maybe you're like, oh, I don't want to do things that way. I want to do things my way. And then by doing things, I don't know, you kind of subconsciously can pick these things up. So it requires that reflection plus then also being able to be like, okay, like I understand it, and like some accountability of making those changes.
Yeah, I think it is, and some appreciation that maybe some of those leaders were there for a reason, or
Hmm.
for a specific season of life, like to help you with something, right? Like
Right.
and so I'm grateful for some of those leaders that I don't hold up or esteem as much anymore as I used to
Mm.
at that time. And I'm grateful for what I had during those times with them. But it is a hard pill to swallow. If, and this is back to the big if in terms of like some self work there, right? Like if you're not
Hmm.
open to like getting above the line and being open and curious and more committed to learning than committed to being right and holding on to what you need. And that's I think a constant thread through a lot of things that I've seen in
Hmm.
life, even some of the stuff that I've seen you do, Trevor. Like there is this constant like, I don't have it figured out yet, and that's okay. And that journey and
Hmm.
that flow is part of it.
Yeah.
But you got to hold a lot of the outcomes a lot looser. Right there, you can't see it on my camera.
Hmm.
There we go. I'm holding it like this. You got to hold those outcomes a lot looser if you're going to flow a little bit more like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like you have to just I this is such a cliche saying, but it's like trust the process. Just like test, try things out. Like I remember when I travel quite a bit now, but when I was doing it full time, like what I did to start is I did a 10-day test because I was like, will this I'm scared. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know what's gonna happen, so I'm gonna go try a little. And then worst thing that happens is like I have a nice vacation and I come home and that's it. I'm done. But I loved it, and then I just went like all in on that, like traveling and doing like the digital nomad type thing.
Hmm.
And I think it's like the same stuff or same thing when you're looking at maybe leadership in the workplace, when you're trying to like find your true self, your voice, your path. It's like I feel like I'm asking you a leading question a little bit, but like, in my opinion, I think that people generally like not I'm encompassing too many people with this, but some people maybe look at some of these changes, reflections, these workplace changes, career changes, personal changes, and they might get too caught up in like the big thing when in essence you can just start really small
There you go.
and make small changes, do small tests, see the impact before blowing up your organizational structure, telling everyone that on Fridays they get to work on their own side hustle under your on your payroll or something. You know,
You hit it there, and I don't want to make this a ton about our work at Econic, but what makes some of our work at Econic unique is about half of our work is in innovation, strategy, and practices. The other
mhm,
half is evolving how and why people do work, and we bring those things together quite often in saying, hey, you want to shift how you do recruitment? You want to shift how you do onboarding? You want to shift how you do performance management? You want to, whatever the workplace practice is, we say, well, how about we design experiments with assumptions and hypotheses that we could test? And oh, by the way, at the same time as we're working with a team to figure out and learn and iterate through your onboarding, evolution that you're trying to do, you're also helping the people practice those same behaviors that you need more of in your organization in general. Right. And so it goes to the heart of a lot of why I love work. And that is that I think work is a great sandbox to practice more of the behaviors that we need in life and community and society when it's done well, right? Like taking a small group of people and having them be curious, being open to diverse opinions, being empathetic to the customer or the employees that they're trying to serve. Admitting what they don't know and being able to learn something new, collaborating, like all these things. Like I think society in general would be better if we all got to practice more of this. And we have a reason to pay people like to practice these things and make our businesses better in the long run. It feels like the trifecta. I don't know if I added three things in there or quadfecta. I don't bet on horses, so I don't know what the things are, but it sounds like a lot of wins.
Yes. So I want to take a step back before we go down any more I bring us down any more rabbit holes. I'm trying to think of when we met. We probably met at like the Iowa Startup Accelerator back in like 2015,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
2014,
Sounds
something
about
like
right.
that. Almost 10 years ago. That's crazy. Crazy, crazy. So you've done a lot of stuff in your career since then. Like Iconic was only a couple years old when I think when we met,
I
and
hadn't
you've
even
been work.
started Econic yet. It was December of 2015. I was solo when we first met,
Oh,
I think back in 2014.
okay.
Hmm.
So Iconic hadn't even been born yet,
Yep.
and you were pretty much so you've run Iconic for how long is it? 7, 8 years, something like that.
Hmm.
Long time. And I don't necessarily. What did you do before Iconic? Just for context.
So I had a couple of years of trying to figure out what we wanted to do, which was
Mhm,
working with startup accelerators, thinking I was going to
mhm.
start a startup accelerator, doing workshops and coaching at Iowa Startup Accelerator and a couple other dozen around the U.S. And then prior to that was 10 years in international human resources consulting, where I was facilitating, doing workshops, leading client work, leading sales, strategic alliances, those types of things.
Yeah.
But about 10 years of that sort of work, went out on my own into my
Mhm.
first failed startup, then started working with a bunch of other startups. We had Family Box, that subscription box thing on the side for a couple of
Yeah.
years there too, which gave me some unique B2C experience, which I'd never had before.
Hmm.
And then Econic
What
was
was
2015. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're still that's like still your main thing, right?
That is the main thing. Yep. We got
Yes.
we got
Yes.
we got payroll, we got benefits, we got all the main
Yeah.
thing stuff.
Well, I see you posting lots of stuff on LinkedIn, so I'm like, is this author book related? Is this Econic related, or is this something different? So I'm not always 100% clear if like you have, I don't know, you just look like somebody who's doing a lot of cool stuff. So I I never know if it's separate or the same. So I
It's
just
all the
wanted to
same. And to be
clarify.
clear, the book is connected to Econic as well.
Yeah.
It's not a tradition. I don't even say it's traditional. It's not nowadays. There's this whole modern author trend of like make the book that turns into the workshop, that turns into the business, turns into the online course.
Hmm.
It's not that type of book. But it is one that likely the people who resonate with the book likely would resonate with the type of work that we do at Econic.
Okay, gotcha.
Mhm.
Yeah, so and just like I know you don't want to dive too much into Iconic, but give me like the elevator pitch for Iconic. What does Iconic do?
Yep. We are a team of facilitators, coaches, consultants who work with mid-sized companies to help them evolve the how and why they do business. This typically looks like an organization says we need to have more growth mindset, or we need to have more psychological safety, or help us build an innovation lab. And we come in and we do custom and configured programming around that. Work with leadership teams to help them shift their mindset, number of things
Yeah.
there. You and I first worked together back on John Deere, actually, there in
Yep.
Iowa. We were building an
Yeah.
internal accelerator program for John Deere.
Yeah, that seems like a lifetime ago. There's so much that feels like it's
That was
happened
several
since
years
then.
ago. That was but I liked you so much from the Iowa startup accelerator days that you were a great addition to the team during that project.
That was a fun project. I think I was just a lot more, I feel like I was just much more naive and gung ho at that point in my life where I was like confidently incorrect about a lot of things. So but I think that's kind of part of being in startup world is like you kind of you have to have some confidence or faith that the direction you're heading will cultivate some type of win.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, then you're probably not even gonna start. So
Yep.
that's a lesson I've learned is to be still be confident, but try to tone it back and be less incorrect sometimes.
Tying back to the book, it's what I call a chosen naivete, right?
Yeah.
Like you're naive, but it's beyond just like this ignorance, and it's beyond this like hyper rational. Like you can come to a spot where you can say, huh, what feels reasonably and intuitively true,
Mm,
and not quiet. Sometimes that feeling inside of you, like, "Huh, I wonder, maybe we could do this," and yeah, do a quick little logic check, but don't lose that voice that's also saying, "Hey, what about this part of what
mm.
you're thinking?"
Yeah, I think that absolutely makes a lot of sense. So in this entire like time frame, you've had all this experience. I'm curious about your failed startup too, but we can come back to that. You could have written a lot of different books. You could have written like books on very specifically like I haven't read this one, so maybe some of these topics are baked into it. But I feel like you could have written stuff on like starting a startup, building innovation in corporations, like how to build teams, innovative thinking, these exercises. And it feels like this one is more personal, a little bit. Like it has more of a personal touch. Like I feel like when I read the title and I and I like I said, I haven't read the book yet, but the when I was looking at the landing page, it felt like something you would write versus something that was like, here we're just making like you could have written any book. Why this one? I guess is what I'm asking.
Um, so being vulnerable, I don't know, and
Hmm.
maybe we can get into what the writing process was like if that's interesting to you. But
Yeah.
I this book kind of just came out of me, right? And several months ago when I was trying to reflect on the, well, why did you write the book, um, somebody asked it in the way they're like, what inspired you to write the book? And what hit me was like, oh, the word inspire is just in spirit. It just means something was breathed into you, right? Like you can't rationally explain inspire. We try to add words to it later, and I feel like that is a little bit of how this book came about. And so
Hmm.
during the writing process, it was a lot of just kind of following patterns and following trends and seeing how stuff unfolded. And this is what it came out, and there's structure to it and process. We can talk about those sorts of things, but at the core of it, you're right. Like, absolutely could have written another book on innovation practices and strategies, or strength management, or great cultures, or there's all those books. There's also probably a part of me that still likes to feel original. And so
Yeah.
the fact that like those books had already been written, I was already like, ah, because actually the first book that I started out writing was more probably like something that would have ended up being like a tenth of what Conscious Capitalism or Firms of Endearment or one of those great Raj Sisodia books would have been like. In fact, I even read his penultimate book, The Healing Organization, and after I read it, I'm like, I should stop writing. I just need to go promote this. But this was the book I was trying to write, and mine is going to be nowhere near as good as this. And it was then later in conversations with Raj talking about my book that I realized, oh, I'm not meant to write another book like what he writes. Like I've got something else that I want to bring to the world that is a different bent or a different angle to this.
Hmm.
So that's how it came out. Yes, it is a bit personal in that there's a lot of my lessons and growth in it. There are some stories personally as well as iconic in it, but most of the book is about other people's stories and research and all the anecdotes there. Right? Like the second chapter is like an entire early years of Patagonia and Yvon Chouinard and some of his early journey, just because it's such a great example of trying to build a business in a way that the rest of the world was looking at saying like, why are you doing that? And continually doing stuff that other people think is naive, and yet he was just following a different voice that was inside of him.
Yeah. Yeah, I I saw him speak probably around 2016, 2017 in Cedar Rapids. He came and spoke at Coe
Wow.
College. Yeah, he is a fiery individual, man. He is very, very passionate about conservation and saving the environment and like just he's older now, but his like he just got a really I don't know how else to describe it, but like this super strong fire. Like I think they're still fighting the U.S. government now. Like they sued them, they were suing them. He was in the process of doing it when he was there, and he was up on stage like cursing up a storm, like just like it's all students, and he was like, man, like you have to get out and like you have to like stand up for things that you believe in. You have to fight for what you like, the type of world you want to build, and these types of things. And he was giving examples of what he was doing, which was
Hmm.
it was crazy. So, but I guess that kind of speaks for the direction Patagonia's taken.
Yeah,
Oh, it's probably since the beginning. So.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm. So you were talking a bit about, before we dive into writing process, I want to know, so you've clearly had some, like, I think if somebody's looking at things from the outside, right? You had a successful career doing international, you said HR consulting, right?
Yep. Hmm.
Yeah, to summarize. Then you had, I don't know if a lot of people would know that you had the startup, and then you have basically Iconic, and now you're selling, I think you've sold thousands of copies of your book at this point. That's not bad. So it sounds like you've just had a ton of wins pretty consistently, but I want to talk about I want to talk about the failed startup. So we don't have to talk about what it was or what you
Yeah.
like what happened or anything like that, but I'm curious as to like I've been a part of I've tried so many things that haven't worked out. I feel like I've tried, like when I talk to the average, even like the average entrepreneur, I'm just like, man, I still feel like my at bats are very, very high. Some have been done very well, some have been epic failures. Just that just never went anywhere. My own my own personal, let's see, learnings, lessons, whatever. But how, like, what did you learn when that startup didn't work out, and how did you take that and apply it? Like, what lessons did you learn, and how did you apply that to like your career and life moving forward?
Yeah. So I will give you a couple fails in there, just so we can we can have a more realistic batting average. So when I left that first company, we put our house up for sale, and we were pregnant with our fourth child to go into this first startup. So it was an all in sort of moment. Um, I was grateful. Trisha, my partner, was still working full time, so we still had benefits, so that was a plus. But went in full time on this, and within a couple of months, realized that it wasn't going to work. There were intellectual property issues that I wasn't aware of. There were cash flow issues. The other individuals were still working on other projects, and it just wasn't a fit. And so within a few months, it actually became pretty clear, like, oh, well, what did I do? And then the house didn't sell for near as much as we thought it would. And it was definitely one of those times where the big lesson that I came out of it probably could have been, don't be so naive in jumping into things. And yet what came out of it was like, I'm still okay, and we're fine, and we'll figure stuff out. And it was over coffees with a couple of other entrepreneurs sharing some of the things that I wish I would have known and done, like validating the problem and talking to more customers before jumping into it, and those things that other founders started saying, yeah, we have those same issues too. And I'm like, yeah, these are the things you should do. And they said, yeah, you should join us and help us fix that. And I'm like, yeah, if you pay me. And within a couple of months was able to pick up a couple of contracts, coaching and working with other startups. And then that led to, oh, maybe I want to have an accelerator program. And then that led to the next thing. And so a big lesson that was in a lot of that was kind of following intuition and joy, and maybe holding some of the outcomes a little bit looser. The outcomes being like status and what are people going to think. Like we sold our house and moved into a smaller home, which we're still in. And you know what? It's just fine and it's great. And like each of those moments, whether they're good or bad, and probably even more so in the bad moments, air quotes there, you're like, I'm still here. Right? I saw this great meme recently that was like a pie chart that said percent of worst days ever you survived. And it was like 100%.
Yeah.
It's like that's brilliant. And yet we forget that the next worst day we have. And So I think there was a lot of resilience that was built there. Another one was the subscription box business that we did. We started it as a ministry. It was kind of like crafts in a box, like Sunday school in a box for kids ages 4 to 9. And it was a great project that Trisha and I and the kids worked on for almost 2 years. And it became pretty clear within the first 10 or 11 months, even as a side project, that the business model mechanics didn't work out for subscription boxes. Now I think a lot of people have seen that the majority of those didn't work out as well. And we still worked at it for another year, eventually licensed it to someone else. They eventually went out of business. Like, so that was also one that I wouldn't call like a raging success, but there's so much learning that came out of that. Even in the early years of Econic, I started out with a 50-50 partner. And based on how we were growing and what we were focusing on, I got to a point where I kind of said I tell people I had a too big of ego, too small of heart moments where I was like, I don't see this working out with you, partner, anymore, and initiated kind of buying him out. And it caused, he was a good friend, and it's caused a riff in our relationship still to this day. And there have been plenty of other decisions and things that I have done, even over these last 8 years of Econic, that didn't turn out the way that I thought they were going to. And like, I'm still okay. And I've learned a hell of a lot as I continue to move through it. And so that self-awareness, that grace you give yourself, that ability to learn when to go back and to apologize to people, to say like, oh, you know what, 2017 Josh was a real jerk to you, I'm sorry. Like, and like those sorts of things have all been great lessons.
It reminds me of a conversation I had. I was in Bosnia, and I stayed at this place called the War Hostel. There's like the New York Times did a write up on it where you stay in like a simulation of what the siege of Sarajevo was like with a local family.
Wow.
And most people would be like, "No, I'm not going to do that." But I signed up to stay there for a week. Like no electricity, no running water, nothing. You slept on the floor. But you stayed in the family's house that survived the siege, and the guy who grew up during the siege, he was 4 when it started. He runs this, like they call it a living museum.
Mm,
And so I
mm,
interviewed him, and one of the things he said is like, you know, a lot of people get caught up in like things that don't matter that much. Like you said, you were talking about like status. What do other people think? If I have to have a smaller house, and he just is like, people go to the beach and they complain because the sand isn't the right. It's not the right texture, or it's too warm. And it's like, man, there's people that have a plastic pool in their backyard that are going to go sit in it and think it's the best thing ever. And, there's people that have been through some of these experiences that don't survive. So every day that you wake up is really like a second chance to do whatever it is that you want to do.
mm,
And,
mm.
whatever it is, like if you're still alive, you still have a chance.
Yeah.
And I think also keeping in perspective that like I'm guilty of this sometimes as well, where I'm like, oh man, my I don't have the newest iPhone. That's depressing. Um, and it's like, dude, I have an iPhone though. Like, do you haven't like some people can't even get a cell phone at all. Some
Yeah.
people can't afford the next meal. Why am I complaining about not having the newest technology?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
kind of reminded me of his perspective on things a little bit. But I think that like just taking the time when these things don't work out and looking at I started a food cart when I was 20, 21 with a
Mm-hmm.
couple friends of mine, and it did not work out because of there was some stuff that happened, and we had to like ask one person to step out of the company, and then it was just like in such a bad state after that that we just had to like close it and sell everything off.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a while to like come to grips, not grips, come to like find the lesson.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh man, what could I have done differently? I'm like, well, I did all these things. I worked really hard. And then I was like, maybe the lesson is like I have to be more careful. Like just because I like someone doesn't mean it's somebody I should go into business with. Like I
Mm-hmm.
could have done more due diligence, things like that. So I think there's always, even in wins too, it's like what could I have done differently, better? What did I learn? Yeah, and I think that comes back to your book, like being aware, the reflection, asking yourself questions,
Yeah.
and taking the time to do the self work.
I think so. And being able to be okay with saying I might be wrong, right? What else? Uh,
God forbid.
right? Like
Oh no.
that exactly. But I think being able to sometimes start from that point of view, um, is so powerful. I growing up, I loved improv, and in
Mm,
fact, for my launch party, we're doing like a small little improv thing. And one of the greatest things from improv is yes and right, like this the
mm,
idea of like something brings it to you, and you could say like, oh yeah, that, and let's build this, and how that actually builds energy and momentum. And when someone brings you another idea, like you can like no, or you can be like yes, and you can choose if you want to hold on to it or keep it, right? Somebody else's idea, somebody else's polarizing opinion, any of those sorts of things. Like, and I find it's so powerful, this I might be wrong or this yes and sort of idea, even with people you don't agree with. Like, I was talking to someone yesterday and he said they were practicing this with like silly prompts, like, I think pushing your car to work is the best idea ever. And someone being like, yes, and man, that would be really, really great exercise that you'd be able to get. And what if you were able to like push other people in the car? And my point in bringing up that example is the moment you like made inclusion happen, like, well, then like people's defenses start to go down. You can start to have other conversations. You can start to do things, right? Like, there's already a lot of diverse opinions and ideas that are out there. Sometimes you have to start with like inclusion of people and things so that people know that they're in relationship, and that you can then talk about things, or you can talk about differences or whatever it might be, right?
mhm. This was something I've had to call myself out on recently, which is like, it's really easy to say, no, that's not possible. Like,
Mhm.
no, we can't do that. Like, I don't even remember what it was. It doesn't even matter. But I was doing some journaling and I was like, oh man, I'm realizing like I never used to say no to stuff. Like no as in like no, we can't do that, or no. That's like, yeah, I see what you mean, but no, that just can't happen. I think in the past I would always be like, how is that? How can we do it? Like, if a world existed where this was possible, what would that look like?
Mhm.
And I think when you stop saying no and you start saying how, like there's an exercise from a book called, I think it's called The Medici Effect.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, so if you're running a company and you have this thing that says, like, our hypothesis is people want to learn how to play video games better online with a coach.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's assume that that doesn't work. Like, they don't want to be coached. So, but they want to learn. Okay, so what are 10 ways we can help people get better at video games without having them be coached?
Yeah.
Like, how does our company stay alive if this thing is false?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that can be applied in a lot of ways too, where it's not just like, no, now I'm sad and it didn't work. Now I'm on to the next thing. It's like, no, no, like how?
Yeah. We use that acronym HMW, how might we, all the time to
Yeah.
things. And this goes back to the naivete. I think some people are like, but you can't say yes to, or you can't do all of these things. You can't just give. And yet, maybe full circle back to the questions from the book. It depends on your point of view. If you think resources are limited, then you're right. You probably can't. Okay. But if
Mm,
you think that your resources are more abundant, or you can be generous, maybe even unlimited if you got the right people involved in things, you can start to shift your point of view. And so back to the questions, like, let's say my time is scarce. Okay, where did you learn this? Is it really true? And what do you gain and what do you lose
mm,
by holding that? There's of course things you're going to gain and lose by holding that belief. Being able to build in intentional reflection time to at least check yourself every once in a while, that you're not just working off an outdated bias or reflexive belief loop, there is extremely important, because I
mm.
think it then helps you reframe maybe your approach to questions or things like that.
Yeah. Do you think it's helpful to have like a coach or therapist or someone like that to help call you on that? Yes.
I think it does. Oh yeah, I think it
Yeah.
absolutely does. Friends or team members or other people who care about you enough
Mhm.
to be able to call that stuff out. Uh,
Going back to the book, and I won't take us on any more tangents for a few more minutes. So if somebody sits down and they read, I'm going to say the name wrong. Dare to be, I almost said Born to be Naive, but I was like, that can't be right. Dare to be Naive. What is it that you want them to take away from this book? Because you said you didn't want to write these other ones because they didn't feel like this one was more, I think you said inspired. You were more inspired to write this one. So what is it that you want people to take away or feel or learn after reading it?
Yeah, the first, and it's a little bit of a spoiler, is that the word naive has kind of been hijacked, uh, and it doesn't mean what it used to mean.
Mm.
So today, when people call someone naive, it's usually like a pejorative thing, and a lot of times it's like you're ignorant or you're childish or you're unsophisticated, which is interesting because unsophisticated is just like lacking wisdom. And yet, like the original meaning of the word naive, from the Latin word nativus, is just means natural or authentic or innate. It was used in like a neutral, a positive way, actually, for a long time, up until a couple hundred years ago. So it was meant as like someone who was really being true, someone who was being authentic or natural. And if you think about it, we still use it in that way when we're talking about childlike naivete, right? Like children being naive. It's like they're innocent, they're pure, they are free in some ways. And then we have the next stage of life that piles on all this stuff of like, this is what you should do and this is how things work and all of that. And what I find is personally and then professionally, this is kind of what Econic gets called into, is like start to unrip some of that stuff. And we want people to go back to being more authentic or genuine or vulnerable or not knowing the answers and being able to learn and adapt and not being set in their ways and think outside the box. All these things that we used to prize, right? Back in the day. And so, what I want people to take away from this is being naive actually might just be a return to something you still have inside of you from the start, and actually might even be more natural and innate. And so I believe inside all of us is that kind of generative instinct, sometimes that voice that's like, no, think of this or believe this or try this or I wonder if. And that is a part of each person, but there's a lot of noise that kind of covers that up. And so being able to discover, people are probably going to tell that I'm kind of a word geek. The word discover I love, because it's actually like to remove the cover, discover. Like the thing was there in the beginning. All you're doing is rediscovering that thing which was inside of you from the start. It doesn't imply that something was created. So I hope that people take away that, and I hope that the stories and prompts and ideas really, again, just poke at people enough to say, what do I actually believe, and how do my beliefs inform the practices that I employ, both at work and at home?
Now I'm reflecting on, I'll read your book and I really want to do some reflecting after this too, because I feel like these are all, yeah, it's kind of like what you said, like it's you're discovering or uncovering. I don't even know the right words. I'm reflecting too much right now on on everything you said. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I'm sure you've seen these quotes or read these in books where, like, when you, and maybe you've experienced this yourself, but like when you become, like, the older you get, you realize that at some point you kind of like left some of that, like, childlike part of yourself behind a little bit. And maybe that happens with, like, some of your naivete, right? Maybe when you were younger, you had a lot of it, and then you got taught, well, this is just the way things are. This is how people do things. This is realistic. You just kind of have to, like, fall into place and do your thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point you kind of realize that that's not true. Like but you can choose.
You can
And
choose.
like you said, it's sometimes it takes some bravery, so you do have to be a little daring, because I mean it's not like you're jumping off a cliff, but maybe some people might feel that way by challenging the status quo in their organization, their personal life, their professional life. And I don't know, when you got through the process of writing it, did you feel like, man, I'm at a loss for questions right now? Um, because everything you said was so on point, and I'm like, damn.
Well, I can add a couple more things. You can
All right,
reflect. You
I'm gonna
can
cut that part
zone
out.
me out. Alvin Toffler was a futurist, and one of the quotes that he's known for at least popularizing, I don't know if it's actually his, but he
Mhm.
popularized this quote that was, the illiterate of the 21st century are not those who cannot read or write. They're the ones who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And the general trajectory of where the world is going, I think, requires people to be able to be even more adaptable and nimble and
Mm.
change ready and whatnot. And I think we're seeing people leaning into that and trying things out and experimenting with different things. And so I think it's a beautiful time of more and more aspects of nonconformity, right?
Mm.
And how you follow or what you follow into that nonconformity, like into something different. Like I'm going to be a digital nomad or whatever it might be. Again, it'll work out. It may not work out, whatever it might be. But like there's this interesting cycle that happens when you're curious and you try something and it worked or it didn't work, but you learn and it wasn't as scary, or maybe it was super joyful, whatever it might be. Like each one of those creates like this flywheel effect. And so it's very much this practice that you do need to get into, of being able to be curious or wonder what if or how it might be, and to try. And I think that just, I don't know, for some people that ends up working out and being a great way to continue to grow and experience life. And this is at another level, but what I've experienced through some of those cycles of, oh, it worked or it didn't work out or whatever it might be, is that each time like the bottom falls out, like there's still something deeper.
Mm.
There's still
Oh no.
something
Oh no.
deeper. There's still something like innate. There's still
Yeah.
something natural that's trying to get out. And so that thing that is manifesting itself and unfolding, or whatever it might be, whatever you want to call it, is I don't know. It's found, I think, through experience that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, and what you said about learning, relearning stuff, it's like you almost have to be an insane expert, like a inch wide, mile deep type of expert, or it seems that you have to be able to learn stuff very quickly to like a mediocre, like kind of learn a lot of things, be very adaptable, and get to be at a proficient level quickly.
Hmm.
That seems to be like the like two like if you want to be really successful in your career, it seems like one of those two skill sets or specialties is like extraordinary. So it's a weird world because I think in the past it wasn't that way, and things were a bit more defined. Like you kind of knew like this is how things were going to be for a while. Things didn't
Yeah.
change as fast as they do now. And I think that makes some people scares some people, makes some people uncomfortable. Some people are excited, but it's definitely a whole new world every few years. It feels like
Yeah,
so.
absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, some of the lists that used to, come up with, well, here's the top 5 skills you need for the next 5 years. Most of those
Hmm.
have stopped putting out actual technical skills, and now they're just more behaviors like curiosity and critical thinking, and they're just
Hmm.
they're next level behaviors and skills that people need versus coding and design and any of that, because the base level things that allow you to adopt new ideas, like
Hmm.
the things that help you adapt are actually the things that are being prioritized more and more, and hopefully practiced
Yeah.
more and more.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with college degrees moving forward as well. Because when I see like job postings and they have like you need a 4-year degree in X. I'm just like, but I feel like if they got that 4-year degree, everything they learned, especially if it was like computer science, is probably outdated. Like they probably had to learn something new.
Likely. Likely.
Yeah. So when it comes to like learning new things and trying and like adapting to a new skill, like writing a book, this is the first time you've done it.
Correct. Yeah.
So what did you have to do? Like how did you learn what was your process like learning to write a book? And then when you were like, because I'm asking for my own selfish reasons here again, because I'm working on my book that I kickstarted, and I found that sometimes like I had estimated like 2 to 3 hours per page, and I'm finding it's more like 10, 10 hours a page. But it's like a long, I find it's like sculpting, right? Like you kind of have this like piece of clay that you put on the page, and you like ring it around once and you're like think it's pretty good, then you look at it and you're like no, that's not it, and you just having to keep like refining and refining. I don't know, I found some things to be a bit more successful than others when it comes to sitting and writing, but I'd really like to
Mhm.
hear what your process is like and then how you kind of learn that skill and strengthen the writing muscle.
Yep. So I feel like I was lucky that I fell into a writing program with a company that's now called Manuscripts LLC. It was a 20
Mm.
week writing accelerator program. And
Oh, I've heard of these, but I didn't know if they were actually legit.
so this one was this
Mm.
one was, and I can share more of the pros and cons later if it makes sense. But what I learned during that program a few of my takeaways that helped me get to the first draft manuscript. Without it, I would not have. The first one, we were in a nonfiction cohort, and they suggested that rather than starting with, here's your book premise, create your table of contents, pitch your book, etc., start actually in reverse, which is what are some topics you're interested in, and go listen to some YouTube videos, some podcasts, read some things on it. Each time you listen to one of those things, write up 50 to 100 words or so on it and start
Mhm.
collecting all these snippets. I think they even call them snippets. Like collect all these little snippets of things. And then after a bit, we'll teach you how to go find experts on those little snippets and talk to those people and write up a little bit and see what you learn from that. And so the first several weeks of these 20 weeks, we weren't writing chapter. We weren't writing. In fact, chapters were built like towards the end of it all. Once we had collected all of the Lego bricks, Eric, the main professor, actually said a couple of times, before you can connect the dots, you have to have the dots. And so, at least what we did is we were dot making, snippet making, and then eventually started to find the patterns that came out of that, which is different than maybe a fiction book. Or I mean, I'm just thinking about the book that you're writing and the story arc that you need to have across that. there's a that would be a very different approach, I imagine. And they actually had a completely different cohort for fiction writers that I'm sure had different techniques. Ours was much more do these snippets. Then one of the successful exercises was go to the library and pull down 40 books from your genre and just look at the chapter structures that they used, because they showed basically like here's Simon Sinek's chapter structure, here's Brene Brown's structure. If you strip it down, it's personal anecdote, story, research, secondary story, research. Like they all are pretty much following the similar scaffolding, and so then you can take your snippets and plug it into that, and then see where else you need to keep writing. And so, from a structural standpoint, those were a number of things that help. In terms of how I wrote then, or when I wrote, I benefited from having an early editor who was part accountability buddy and part reviewer of content that was helping improve my writing, so that each week I was at least picking up a couple of tips like, oh, be more detailed or be more descriptive in what you write, or try these things out. But 80% of the time was like, good job, Josh. What you did, great writing. You got your 1,000 words in this week. You're amazing. And so that actually went a long ways for me. And they also had specific like join at this time and write for 3 hours or 2 hours and come online. You need to be logged in so that we see that you're logged in, and then you type and write. And that also helped me get a number of the big chunks of the book done,
Mhm.
where I would be like, okay, I have these 4 interviews that I've been waiting on, and I've got those done. I've got the transcripts. I'm going to take 3 hours and just really turn those into stories and crank out a couple thousand words during one of those writing blocks. So those are
Yeah.
those are just a few of the things that popped up.
Yeah. So when you were working on these writing blocks, what was your setup like?
It was quite boring. I did it honestly in the space right here. I was at my house and I wrote on my MacBook right here.
Yeah.
I didn't, as I'm thinking about it here, because it's now been almost 2 years. I used Otter.ai for interview transcripts, so I was able to pull that in. I used Quip as my writing and collaboration tool for it. So those were 2 tools that I used. That said, there were people in my cohort who did the booking hotel rooms and got away to go write. Someone who like always did great writing on the train, and so like booked random useless trips on a train just to write or other things. And so I was able to figure out how to do it more or less in my space, though I did have to block off some evenings and just tell the rest of the world like I'm in writing mode and shut
Yeah.
everything down on the computer. And I mean, I have
Hmm.
4 school-aged kids, so it was also like, nope, this is dad writing night. Sorry.
Yeah. How long did it take you to write the book?
6 to 8 months probably to get the first draft of the manuscript done, and then
Oh yeah.
quite a bit of time for all the revisions and copy editing. And then I ended up switching publishers, and so that added another several months to it, which I guess that actually goes back to another thing too, is one of the big tips they gave is like write something, set it to the side and write the next thing, set it to the side and write the next thing. Because you can
Ugh.
spin too much on perfecting that page or that paragraph or whatnot.
Yeah.
And so being able to truly get that like shitty first draft out of the way and
Mm.
then come back to it, that was extremely helpful. And
Yeah.
so the way that that worked well too for us is we had by that time another type of editor that was working with us that I could just write something and then like plop it over to their queue and then move to the next thing. So I wasn't even really allowed to go back in and start tweaking until they had gone through and done a pass at some stuff. And so that helped not over obsessing about every single little word choice.
Dang. Yeah, that's a good idea. I feel like I should probably do that because that's that's where I've been spending most of my time is like the first I think that's from like Anne Lamott's book, Shitty First Drafts, The Rule of Shitty First Drafts or something like that. And like I get the first draft up and then I'm like, okay, fine tune. And then I realize I've spent my entire writing time on one page and I haven't made it past that page yet. And I do think that maybe that is a good idea of just saying like, okay, we're literally just you're gonna write the first draft of chapter one, and then you're gonna write the first draft of chapter two, and then when that's done, we're gonna come back and fix it.
It,
Once you're done, we'll come back.
yeah, I don't know if this is true, so this is just an opinion. But I assume generating the first version of something versus refining something for the fourth time uses different parts of your brain. And so it's
Mm,
probably a little similar like to multitasking in
mm,
which that you are having to context switch into a different type of thing that you're doing. That's my hunch. And so there's probably smarter people listening to this who understand the science behind some of this, but I think that allows some of it just to get out. The other part that I'll say, you're recalling all these good things from the writing group now, is way earlier than I felt comfortable. They urged us to start to share early chapter drafts with advanced readers and building that community for a couple of main reasons. One, it I think it got us over the fear of, oh, is this even any good? Because you're able to say like, this isn't very good, but I'm getting it out there and people know it's an early draft. But two, like it started to build that community of people who then saw their fingerprints on the work
mm,
itself. So by the time I had my book published, there's probably about 120 people who saw at least one early chapter of the book and had read it and given me some feedback on it. And that was very intentional for me to get better, but also for community building. And I do think some of that led to why we had a few thousand pre-orders even before today's launch day, was because we had enough people who were part of that community. And it wasn't, I mean, these are lessons from our startup days, right? Like
mhm.
what we're doing is we're just MVPing and testing and gaining
Oh, that's so
early
true.
customers before they're customers, right?
Mm. Yeah, it's getting your what's the word? It's like advocates or your raging fans or loyal fans or whatever the term is.
Yeah.
People that will be your basically spreading it for you, your community of people.
You hope so. Or the ones who hated it. I sent the intro chapter to several people who did not like the premise of the
Yeah,
book or the idea at all. And it back to our earlier comment, like I got it and it hurt and I'm still here. Like I survived that day too. And so there's growth in that. And as another mentor then told me, they're like, great, you got to a spot where you're not trying to please everybody, and because
yeah,
you're okay that this book is not going to land for everybody, right? There's
right.
the reason why the book is still called Dare to be Naive and not Be Curious or Be a Change Agent or something that probably would be more palatable to more people.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, it's true. It's like if everybody kind of likes what you have, no one loves it or hates it, you probably didn't really make anything like that different or
Yeah.
that like, you haven't really done anything that's tried to be extraordinary. It's just kind of like you've tried to make everyone happy. It's probably vanilla.
Yeah, that's quite possible. Quite
Yeah, I mean,
possible. Hmm.
maybe it's great and everybody loves it, but I feel like if you try to make everyone happy, you don't truly make anyone like that excited or that happy.
Yeah. I think it comes back to what the intention, right, is
Mm,
of what the book is. And I eventually got over the spot of I'm selling a book for the hundreds of people around me and writing this book for that. I'm not writing a book for the mass market or for millions of people. And so I think
mhm.
even Seth Godin does a good job of talking about, what's the smallest viable audience? Well, you have to answer what viable is for you if you're
Hmm.
trying to do it. And if part of the goal of your book is you need it to sell millions of copies, well, then you're going to approach things differently
Hmm.
than that. Econic works with a dozen companies a year or so. Like I don't need to please everybody.
Hmm.
And I can afford to be out there and be a little bit more provocative and allow it to be an attractor to the type of work that I want to do. I just finished Hidden Potential, Adam Grant's new book,
Hmm.
right? Like that's a great book, and it's written for a very wide mass market audience. I'm sure there was so much testing and everything that was done to say, is this palatable to enough of the right people?
Hmm.
Right, but it aligns with the intention that he and his publisher had for that book, and
Yeah, to
hopefully ours
sell
aligns
more.
with our intention too, right?
Right. I mean, it sounds like you've done the work. I have this feeling, and I think other people can tell in a way, like when you consume something and you feel like somebody's like poured their like heart and soul into it and they've tried really hard and they cared a lot. There's like attention to detail. It's been through like tons of changes and testing and iteration. I'm saying that when it could be an art form too, right? Like they're like making it better. A book, whatever it is. I feel like you can get a video, you can kind of tell when you see it, like how much care has been put into the entire process. It almost, maybe it's more of like a feeling you get. It like has almost has more value. Like, do you know the feeling I'm
Yeah,
talking about?
I know what you're getting
Yeah.
at. It's years ago I read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Yeah, yeah.
I know some people love that book. I was just okay with the book. Sorry,
Yeah, yeah.
that's on record now.
I
But
agree with you actually.
so but what I appreciate in the book is like they're trying to say like quality, right? Like it's that feeling, it's that thing, it's that essence, it's the thing that is alive within it, and like when you see it you can sense it, and we're
Mhm.
attracted to it. And it's ridiculously hard throughout the book and everything for people to be like, well, what is quality? Well, it's like you can't, but I know it when I see it.
Yeah,
And we may dismiss that, but yet at the same time, like we all kind of know what we mean when we say
yeah,
that,
yeah.
right? Like it is there. There's some heart in it. There's some feeling in it.
Mhm.
And in back to the subtitle, there's so much noise that is out there today that it's easy just to go along with the flow. I mean, again, I think I've seen you do a nice job with your Kickstarter and being authentic and putting it out there, etc. You're going to be confronted with the same questions and prompts that I have, and I'm currently getting probably while we're sitting here, which is, oh, you now need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. And I was supposed to be like spamming 50 people an hour to get me reviews on Amazon today, and I've sent like one message, and so I know I'm failing at that today, but it comes back to like what feels authentic and intentional to you, right? Like
Mhm.
what feels quality to you. And there's a whole bunch of noise out there that's like, no, 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 but you're not doing it the right way.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, I have a good friend. His name's Scotty Russell. He started out as like an illustrative lettering artist and then he
huh,
became like a full-time like he just became a full-time artist through and he like started a podcast that was ended up being like one of the top creative podcasts. And I don't know, he's just so good about like he has all I feel like he could have been a poet at some in a previous life or something because he says he has so many little like one-liners that are so relevant to this. And what's the one? Oh, he's like, you're not pizza, you can't make everyone happy. So so it's like whenever you're doing anything, people are like, "Oh, you want to grow your Instagram following? Do like follow, unfollow people. Like try to game the system to like fake your community and stuff like that." That's why I brought up Scotty because he viscerally hates those things because he's like, you're not building a sustainable, you're not building a fan base. You're not building people that you have community with that care about you, that you care about them. You're kind of building like shallow work. You're doing shallow work. You're not, and that's I think it's the same thing when you're like spamming folks for reviews. You're like they don't know you. You're just kind of like throwing a shot in the dark for them to somebody to say yes and then be like, "Wow, best book I've ever read." And so it's I think it's really important to build that authenticity into your community as well. And people can definitely tell when you care. And when you do care, like Scotty's never gonna have to worry about getting another job in his life because when he makes something, he has 100 people lined up to get it, or 1,000 people. And like he doesn't have a million followers. I think he has like 45,000 or something like that. That they're all it's all organic growth, all people that have followed him since the beginning and gotten to know him and gotten to know his family and
That's
seen
cool.
his art change. And I think that's how you do it.
That feels very authentic. I like
Yeah.
that. Thank you for
All right.
sharing that.
Yeah, yeah, no, no problem. So I know I'm taking up, we've gone over a little bit on time, so I just want to ask you like couple, one or two more questions,
Go for it.
and then I'll
Bam.
I'll release you to go celebrate your book launch today. Um, so if somebody was trying to, if they came to you and said, Josh, I feel like I've done pretty well in business, or maybe I want to write a book on something, what advice would you give them?
Hmm.
Where do they start?
Yeah, I I think the first thing to start with is why. Why do you want to write a book? For the majority of us, it's not a good return on investment if you're trying to go by pure numbers or anything like time and energy and everything's put into it. And so I think you do need to be intentional about your why that you're trying to do it. And so why do you want to start your book? The second thing is I would ask the person to identify, well, maybe even before book, I would say, is that your medium? There are some people that maybe a book, it feels like that's a thing I should do, but maybe videos, maybe podcast, maybe music, maybe poetry, maybe something else is your medium. Like, don't get locked into right away like you got to do the book thing. I think that would be an exploration. Assuming you're like, nope, it's a book because of these reasons. Find some books that you love and admire, and figure out why you like those books and what you admire about those books. And that was extremely helpful for me. I am uh, definitely not a closet Seth Godin fan, and so I was very intentional. If you can't see it from here, but I can go grab his. Yeah, just give me 1 second.
Yeah, you're good.
There is a Seth Godin size of book, right?
Mm,
And I was very intentional about the book that I was writing because I love his approach, his prose, the way he signals things. And I wanted to have some signaling around that. So it was intentional about finding trim size. It was intentional about the things that I appreciated from it. And I was honored that I was able to send him my book and he blurbed my book. And so I've got an awesome Seth Godin blurb right
wow.
there on the book. And so, and that was a huge moment for me to say, like, like someone I've admired for 15 years saw me. That was pretty cool. But it came from this, like, okay, what type of book do I want to write? What are books I admire? Why do I like those things? And then some of that stuff kind of just manifested itself from there.
Yeah, so it's like,
Yeah,
so if I had to
those are a few
summarize,
things.
yeah, if I had to summarize, it was like, find, like, ask yourself why, make sure it's
Hmm.
the correct medium, and then if it is the correct medium, then go find books and writers and like the things that you like or love, and figure out why, and see if there's elements in those that inspire you to like inspire your process.
Yeah, but well said. You just need to get started is
Mhm.
part of it too, and I find those little things like help you
Yeah.
kind of get started with it.
Uh,
Mhm.
just a s- just a small side tangent. Have you ever read any of Brandon Sanderson's stuff? He's a fantasy writer.
I have not read any Brandon Sanderson, but we have 30 or 40 of his books in my house
What?
uh, because I have two boys who love
Yeah,
Brandon Sanderson books. So much so that I even reached out to Brandon because he's from Lincoln. And
yeah.
so I tried to get in contact with him recently. He's apparently too popular now and doesn't
He's
just do
yeah.
things. I had no idea how popular he was when I reached out to him and got got somebody from his team being like, "Oh no, Brandon doesn't do little birthday videos for children anymore."
I'm I'm sure he's the type of guy that if you met him personally and asked him, he'd probably do it. But there's
That's
probably
what it
people,
feel. That's what it felt like.
yeah,
That's what it felt like. Yeah.
there's probably people that are there to protect him from himself.
So
Um,
yes, but what's your point though? Sorry.
so so as I just discovered his books a few months ago, and I've just like been on a tear through them because it's such fantastic. I've been so impressed with the writing, and I went back and I read his first book that he ever wrote because it's all in like the same universe. And his first book was so bad compared to like his stuff that was further along. And I realized that from reading like his stuff that was so exceptionally good, it actually has made me like a better reader and by default a better writer. Because after I finished the last book of his, Way of Kings, I went back and I was reading some of my stuff and I'm like, oh, this is trash. Like I gotta rewrite all like this. I saw where I was making mistakes where when I originally wrote
Mm.
that page, I was like, this is pretty good. Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about this. And then after reading like this magnum opus of this amazing author, I'm like, okay, back to the drawing board a little. Maybe I need to like fine tune it a little bit. So I do think reading amazing works really helps. Consuming
I think it,
amazing works helps.
I agree. And if I recall from Brandon's life, I feel like he wrote 10 or 11 books before even that first one got published that you
Hmm.
read. And so like there was a lot of iterating that he had to be able to get to where he's at today. I also would recommend for you and for anybody just the value of a really good editor early on.
Mm,
Like a really good editor makes a huge difference, a
mm,
huge difference. In fact, back to that Adam Grant book, I was fascinated in the acknowledgments section to read the entire team he had helping write that book. Like the research people and the people who were doing it and the couple of editors and the reading group and like it was a whole team writing that book from the way that he describes it. And so I do think modern authors write together, right? That's not
mhm.
just a solo thing, and it doesn't have to be prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like with the advent of AI being able to help with editing at least one of the drafts, that could speed
Oh
up the
yeah,
process and open the doors up to people who are potentially good storytellers, but maybe not as good writers. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
yeah. Somebody sent me an article how they were using Grammarly plus
Hmm.
a GPT. Did you see this?
Mm-mm.
Basically you can use like Grammarly and it'll teach you how to get better, but if you then also put in prompts to say, okay, now GPT, maybe do a custom one or just 3.5 or 4 to say teach me what I did wrong,
Mm,
and being able to copy and paste those drafts into there,
hmm.
using it as a writing coach, he said
Mm.
that accelerated a lot of what he had done. And so I typically hadn't been using it, and I haven't used it yet for that, to be
Yeah.
honest. But to be able to say like, okay, go back and give me tips
Yeah.
on the common errors you saw that I created there, then
Mhm.
that would be amazing to like continually try to get better.
I've used it a little bit, but it's mostly been for like you said, copying and pasting it in there. I didn't think about the coach piece, but I was like, okay, is this good? Like, do I have all the like? I would ask
Yeah.
questions of in comparing this to like I want to write a book that's worthy of being a bestseller, worthy of being read by a lot of people, that's impactful. Is this well written? Is there anything missing? What would you change? And some of the stuff that I got in response, I was like, oh, that's a really good idea. Like, I need to make sure that actually makes sense. I can't just throw in a character and just like pretend somebody else knows who they are when, when like, when like they've just existed in my head. I can't just throw them onto a page and be like, this is
Yeah.
Jeff, and now Jeff is here. And so
Yeah.
I think there's
That's
some,
great feedback. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Being able to use it like that, or the same copy paste, and just what are the consistent errors I made in that
Hmm.
writing?
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
just to be respectful of your time, one more question for you, and that's so you've had a lot of experiences, you've seen a lot of new things started, you've been a part of starting new things, some failures, a lot of learnings. For people out there who just want to get something off the ground, whether it's a startup, a book, make some personal life changes, do some reflecting, start a new hobby. Like for people who are just like in that point, because I think a lot of folks probably have felt this since like 2020 when the world kind of changed a lot at that point. If somebody's looking to kind of kick something off that's new and different, what advice do you have for them?
Yep. It goes back to something you shared before about the travel, and that's what is the next smallest, tiniest action you can take. I love the visual of motivation and action, and that most people are waiting for motivation to act, and yet it is a cycle because the moment that you act, it actually creates motivation to act again. And so it also can be a flywheel. And so oftentimes being able to take the smallest action is what you need to start to get energy into motion. The Who wrote Tiny Habits? The BJ Fogg.
I'm not sure.
I think, and then I think like Atomic Habits was more popular, but I think Tiny Habits was BJ Fogg.
Hmm.
And what I loved about some of the examples in that book were, if you want to start working out every day, start by just putting out your gym clothes in the morning. Like, don't even work out. Just set out your gym clothes.
Mhm.
And then the next day, just put the shoes on. That's it. That's all you need to do. Or you know what? When you have a break, do one push up. That's it. Just try one push up. Because typically what happens is you're down there and you do one push up and you're like, well, I'm already down here. I guess maybe I'll do two. Right. Like,
Yeah.
so what is the smallest, tiniest action you can take, and treat it kind of as a little bit of an experiment? Make it where failure is okay, and then see where you go. So that's probably where I'd say it's motivation. Waiting for motivation to get action could also be treated as do action to get motivation, and
Yeah.
see how that gets started.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. It's like start small, do something that's easy to make consistent, like easy to do, not a lot of effort.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
cool. So any final words about like how it feels now to have your first like I guess I would call it like your first piece of art out into the world and with thousands of people opening their box up today?
I guess just may this next chapter of all of this be exactly what it needs to be for me and for all of those people.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for being on the show, Josh. I appreciate you stopping by today.
Thanks, Trevor.